Hi, my name is Marissa Hale, and I'm 38 years old. I walked into the Whispering Pines Lodge in Willow Creek for our 20-year high school reunion wearing a simple navy blue dress. Not designer, not tailored, just something I liked. The valet barely acknowledged me as he took the keys, and the moment I stepped through the grand double doors, I was instantly reminded that to them, I had never become someone worth noticing. Inside, the resort was draped in gaudy elegance, the kind that tries too hard to feel elite. The chandelier overhead sparkled like imitation Versailles, a not-so-subtle reminder that some people are born into the spotlight, and some of us remain in its shadow. Laughter and clinking glasses spilled from the main ballroom before I even reached the concierge. He handed me a name tag that read Marissa Hale in basic serif font. No title, no distinction, no hint of what I'd done in the 20 years since Jefferson High. That detail, or insult, was unmistakably curated by my younger sister, Brielle. I still wore my West Point ring, tucked neatly under my sleeve where no one would see it. That was intentional. The ballroom opened like a stage set for a play I didn't audition for. Long white linen tables stretched out in rows, crystal vases centered with flowers and ridiculous sparkling gems. A towering cake stood like a monument to self-congratulation. On the big screen, a slideshow of high school memories cycled in slow motion: prom, debate club, cheerleading, the DC class trip. Brielle, of course, was in nearly every frame. I was in maybe 3. She was already on stage when I arrived, her fitted crimson dress catching the spotlight just right. She radiated ease and power. And after 15 years with the Federal Cybercrimes Bureau, she declared, "I'm honored to say I've been appointed as Deputy Director of Cyber Oversight for the Western District." Laughter and applause rippled through the crowd. But I'll never forget where it started, right here at Jefferson High. Then, with a glint in her eye, she added, "And a special thank you to my sister, who's here tonight, for always being uniquely herself." Polite chuckles floated through the room. They weren't sure if it was a compliment. I was. It wasn't. That was Brielle's gift, camouflaging insults and compliments. I found my seat, table 14. It was tucked near the buffet trays and conveniently close to the exit. The front tables had gold-embossed place cards: Dr. Lennox, CEO Camden, Senator Langston, and Brielle Hale. My name tag sat at a table with no centerpiece and a shared plate of limp shrimp cocktail. From across the room, I saw him, Caleb Morrison. Still tall, still smug. His eyes narrowed as he made his way over, scotch in hand, and leaned in with a grin that hadn't matured one bit. "Marissa," he said, dragging out my name. "Still stationed in the desert? Or are you pushing paper in Nebraska now?" "Nice to see you too, Caleb," I replied tightly. He laughed. "Relax, I'm teasing. But seriously, didn't you go to pre-law? What happened?" Before I could answer, a woman with pearls leaned toward another guest and whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "Didn't she drop out of law school?"
Shame.
She had so much potential. Melissa Drake, one of the few people from school who ever showed a trace of decency, caught my eye from 3 tables away. She offered a faint smile. I returned it, uncertain if it meant pity or understanding. Probably both. Dinner service began: prime rib, scalloped potatoes, waiters gliding like clockwork. Brielle made her rounds like a politician working the floor. When she reached my table, her performance was flawless. "Oh, Marissa," she exclaimed, embracing me with a sparkle in her smile. "Glad you could make it. I almost didn't recognize you in that navy blue vintage." "It's just a dress," I said. "Well, you've always been practical." She tilted her head. "You know, we should catch up sometime. I'm sure you've got stories." "Only the quiet ones," I answered. She gave that tight-lipped smile that meant she had no interest in listening. Caleb returned, now joined by 2 other alumni. One of them, a woman in a pale blue pantsuit, squinted at me. "Wait, were you in the military? I remember you left after sophomore year to enlist." The man beside her laughed. "What were you, like a mail clerk or something?" Heads turned. Some laughed. Caleb looked amused. Brielle didn't say a word. I took a sip of water. The glass trembled slightly in my hand, but I didn't let it show. The air in the room seemed heavier, like gravity itself had shifted. But I refused to bend under it. I stood up slowly, adjusted my sleeve to conceal my West Point ring, and looked at them all with a calm earned over decades in silent rooms and secret meetings. I gave a faint smile and said softly, something like that. Then I walked to the balcony, just as my secure phone pinged silently from inside my clutch. They all saw nobody in a navy blue discount dress. What they didn't know was that I had briefed NATO leaders wearing that same dress, under a military coat they couldn't begin to imagine. Outside, the breeze curled like it was trying to listen in on secrets. I stood there, overlooking the golf course, letting the quiet settle around me. It was rare in my world, and tonight it was exactly what I needed. The wind on the balcony was cool, threading through the trees beyond the golf course like whispers I almost recognized. I stood with my back straight, eyes steady on the dark treetops, letting the silence surround me like armor. Inside, the clinking of glass and rehearsed laughter carried on, muffled behind the ornate doors. The reunion was in full swing, a celebration of curated success stories and legacy selfies. I had nothing to prove, and yet just being here stirred something old, something raw. The door behind me hissed open. Footsteps approached, and I knew without turning that it was Caleb. His voice came easy, half a drink in. "There you are," he said, stepping up beside me. "You always did like the edges of rooms." I said nothing. He leaned on the railing, too close, his presence as familiar as it was unwelcome. "You really used to have a future, you know. Valedictorian track, debate team captain, Ivy League practically begging you in senior year. And then poof, Army? I still don't get it." He laughed softly, but there was tension behind it. I remembered that laugh. It hadn't changed since senior year, the last time we stood this close. The hallway outside the orchestra room had smelled like burnt coffee and laundry detergent. I'd told him I'd accepted my offer to West Point. "You're kidding," he'd said, jaw tight. "The military? You're throwing it all away." "It's not throwing away," I'd replied. "It's choosing something bigger." "Yeah," he snapped. "Bigger than me." And then he'd walked away. No call. No goodbye. Now, 20 years later, the same bitterness lingered in his tone. He stared out across the lawn like he couldn't believe I was still standing here. "I didn't disappear, Caleb," I said quietly. "I just stopped explaining myself." He scoffed. "You always did like cryptic answers." I turned to leave, but he caught my arm, gently, hesitantly, just enough to make me pause. "You could have been someone, Marissa." I looked him in the eye. "I am someone," I said evenly. "Just not someone you'd recognize." The door opened again before he could respond. Brielle's voice floated through, light and theatrical. "Caleb, there you are," she called. "They're asking for the Golden Trio photo. Come on, for old time's sake." Then she spotted me. Her smile widened with sugary cruelty. "Oh, Marissa. Didn't realize you were still here. I figured you'd duck out early like always." Caleb dropped his hand from my arm as Brielle looped hers through his, like it had always belonged there. She brushed an invisible speck from his suit and added with a smirk, "Everyone's dying to know what our class's only federal appointee and most successful developer have been up to. I told them you two are still debating who gets the power couple crown." She laughed lightly, her gaze drifting back to me. "And what about you, Marissa? Still somewhere hot? Or are you finally out?" "I'm in transition," I said simply. "Oh," she said with mock concern. "Not out of work, I hope." "I manage fine," I replied. "Just not from behind podiums." She tilted her head. "Always so mysterious." Her smile tightened. "But I suppose not everyone likes the spotlight." She turned and tugged Caleb back toward the ballroom, her heels clicking like punctuation marks behind her. I stayed there a moment longer, letting the cold air seep into my skin. The music inside had shifted to soft jazz, the soundtrack of cocktail chatter and image maintenance. I didn't feel embarrassed. I'd spent too many years learning how to feel everything and show nothing. Eventually, I stepped back inside. The room had transitioned into mingling mode, smaller groups forming near the bar, voices louder now, restraint dissolving into half-empty glasses. Melissa stood near the edge of the room, watching it all like she didn't quite belong either. I walked over. "That was painful," she murmured. I gave a faint smile. "Which part?" "All of it," she said, then added, "You look better than all of them, by the way." I doubt they'd agree. "Doesn't matter," she said. "Truth doesn't need a majority vote." She wasn't pretending. She didn't fill silences with nervous chatter. She simply observed. I appreciated that. Across the room, I spotted Brielle again, leaning in close to Caleb, whispering something that made him laugh. When she noticed me watching, she didn't look away. She smiled. The same smile she used to wear when she'd beat me at anything, real or imagined. "Didn't she used to follow you around like a shadow?" Melissa asked quietly. "She learned to outshine me instead," I replied. Before she could respond, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Gentle, warm, familiar. I turned to see Mr. Harlan, our old AP history teacher. His hair was grayer, frame thinner, but his eyes were sharp as ever. He wore a navy blazer, khakis, and that same crooked smile that used to appear just before handing out surprise essay prompts. "Miss Hale," he said with genuine warmth. "I was hoping you'd be here. I heard about your service." I nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Harlan. You wrote a paper once on asymmetric warfare. I still remember it. Brilliant work." I blinked. That paper had been a middle-of-the-night act of frustration after a phone call with Caleb had left me shaken. I remembered it vividly. He leaned in, his voice lowering. "Tell me, did you ever serve in Ghost Viper?" His question stopped time. I didn't answer. But I didn't need to. He gave a knowing nod. They thought I had disappeared into obscurity. In truth, I had disappeared into national silence. Later that night, when I returned to my hotel room, I shut the door and locked it behind me. The muted echoes of the reunion faded into background noise behind thick walls. I set down my clutch, kicked off my heels, and walked across the room to the hanging navy blue garment bag. Beneath it, nestled in a hard-shell black case with no markings, was the reason I still woke up every day with purpose. I flipped the latches open. The soft glow of the interior lit my face. Fingerprint scan. Retinal scan. Voice confirmation. "Hail, Marissa." Clearance echo 5. A chime. Then, secure comms online. Red thread indicators. Unresolved protocols. Project Merlin, status. Active breach containment. I scanned the intel. 4 red zones. 2 possible internal actors. 1 breach point aligned with a site I'd already flagged. Incoming call, LSJ 2 Cyber Command. I tapped the screen. A man appeared, square-jawed, dark stubble, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Ma'am," he said, "no time for pleasantries. Just got out of debrief. Situation's escalated. They want your eyes on the Merlin intercepts ASA." I didn't blink. "Joint Chiefs?" I asked. "Unofficially. Officially, it's an advisory consult. But we both know what that means. We've got a NATO partner compromised. Internal chatters linking it to Phoenix protocol files." There was a pause, then his voice softened. "Marissa, they need you back in DC by Monday." I looked at the blinking overlay. 4 red zones. But a 5th was starting to pulse. "I can't leave yet," I said quietly. "Understood," he replied. "But if this escalates—" "It will," I said, cutting him off. He stared at me a beat longer, then nodded. "You've got 48 hours. After that, we extract. Whether you're ready or not. Sending intel to your secure cloud now." The screen flickered, then went black. I sat still for a long moment, the low hum of the device beside me strangely comforting. It reminded me I was still needed, still in the fight. A new secure message pinged on screen. Sender: Pentagon Forward Liaison. Subject: Urgent. Standing Authority Update. Status: Direct extraction authorized if hostile action confirmed. Line: You're the fulcrum. I closed the message slowly. I already knew what it meant. If Project Merlin collapsed and the breach spread to civilian systems, it wouldn't matter if I was in heels at a reunion or armored in a bunker. I would be pulled out. The fulcrum wasn't a title. It was a tether. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the lights of whispering pines shimmered over the manicured grass like a painting too perfect to be real. I could hear the DJ inside announcing the next slideshow. 20 years ago, we posed for our yearbook photo. Brielle beamed in every frame. I smiled politely in one. I never imagined my legacy would be silence. But that was about to change. The ballroom ceiling shimmered with reflections from the massive chandelier, casting a golden glow over polished tables and overflowing champagne flutes. The energy inside had shifted, brighter, looser, louder. Everyone was basking in the nostalgia of their own carefully polished success. The class of 2003 had grown into its ambition, power suits, rehearsed laughs, and stories told a little too perfectly. I had returned to table 14. Still no centerpiece, still the forgotten corner. I sat between two former varsity swimmers, now venture capitalists, and across from a woman who ran a skincare line in Beverly Hills. None of them remembered me. They smiled politely, asked if I was local, then drifted back into their own orbit. I didn't mind. Being overlooked had its advantages. It gave you space to see clearly. The music softened. The MC, a balding man with a wireless mic and too much cologne, the same guy who'd once DJ'd prom, stepped onto the small stage near the cake pedestal. And now, he boomed, our highlight of the evening, the 2003 Most Distinguished Alumni Award. He paused dramatically. The votes were unanimous. She's smart, accomplished, and a rising star in federal service. Please welcome Deputy Director Brielle Hale. Applause exploded around the room. Brielle stepped into the spotlight like it had been waiting for her. Her white teeth flashed, her crimson dress seemed tailor-made for this moment, and she walked to the mic with a pause that let every camera focus on her. She didn't look at me once. She didn't have to. Her words were already aimed directly through me. Thank you all, she said, placing a hand on her chest. I'm honored. Truly. It's been a journey from Jefferson High to the Department of Cyber Oversight. And while I'm proud of my title, I'm prouder of what it represents. Over time, we see who rises, who leads, and who simply watches from the wings. There was a polite chuckle across the crowd. Not loud, but loud enough. I didn't flinch. I'd trained my face for silence. I want to thank my mentors, she continued, and the teachers who taught us that serving is noble, but leading, that's where real change happens. Applause again. Measured, admiring. And of course, she said with a twinkle in her eye, I think we all know someone who chose to fade into the background. And that's okay. Not everyone wants or can handle the spotlight. Across the room, I caught Melissa's gaze. She wasn't smiling. Her expression had shifted into something sharper, disbelief. Then, as if summoned by drama, Caleb stood up from his table a few rows ahead of mine. Wine glass raised, cheeks flushed. To Brielle, he announced. Our very own Iron Lady. Proof that leading from the front beats hiding in the shadows. Unless, of course, you're peeling potatoes on a base in Nebraska. The laughter that followed was scattered, unsure. A few laughed because others did. A few because they didn't understand the reference, but sensed they were supposed to. Brielle gave a bashful wave, like the toast embarrassed her. Melissa didn't clap. Neither did I. The MC returned to the mic. Let's hear it for Brielle Hale, everyone. And, hey, any generals in the room tonight? He scanned the crowd. No? Well, maybe next reunion, huh? Laughter again. I rose quietly. No one noticed. Not even the people sitting next to me. I moved between tables, weaving past conversations, heels silent on the carpet. Caleb's voice called behind me, slurred and uncertain. Marissa. Wait. I didn't mean. But I didn't stop. There was nothing left in that room worth hearing. The hallway outside was dimmer, cooler, lined with framed photographs from our high school days, homecoming games, theater plays, honor society inductions. All pieces of a history rewritten in Brielle's image. I moved past the crowd and through the vestibule where the air no longer buzzed with performance. Outside, The night wrapped around me with familiar calm. The stars above Willow Creek were sharp and still, like they had been during long overseas deployments, nights lit by field maps and filtered moonlight, where silence meant danger, not dismissal. And then my clutch vibrated again. Extraction cleared. Helipad ETA, 6 minutes. They had said my life amounted to nothing. But the sky was already beginning to shake. I walked across the back lawn, past the decorative fairy lights, past the trellises where couples sipped wine and posed for photos. Beyond the perimeter, where the event planners had decided photography no longer mattered, I stood alone. My heels pressed gently into damp grass. And then I heard it, the distant sound, deep and rhythmic. Not thunder. Not music. Rotors. Someone near the edge of the tent looked up. Another pointed. A third began recording on their phone. The lights on the golf course flickered, then flared with harsh, directional beams. A low rumble split the air, louder now, closer. And then it appeared. An angular, matte black military helicopter broke the tree line, unmistakable in its design, slicing the sky with precision. Its floodlights swept across the grass, landing on the center lawn. Screams erupted, not of terror, but confusion. Plates dropped. Glasses shattered. People gasped. Brielle's champagne flute tilted, spilling down her dress. Caleb shielded his eyes. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. The chopper descended. Leaves and petals whipped through the air in chaotic spirals. Then it landed. The side door swung open. Out stepped Colonel Nathan Ellison. Full dress uniform. Boots that didn't stumble once on the uneven lawn. Rows of medals catching the light. He walked with calm, measured steps, straight toward me. He didn't glance at the crowd. He only saw me. 3 feet away, he stopped, squared his shoulders, and saluted. "Lieutenant General Hale," he said, his voice unwavering. "Ma'am, the Pentagon requires your presence. Immediate briefing." The words echoed like a siren through the stunned silence. A few people gasped. A phone hit the ground. Someone near the buffet whispered, "What?" Caleb's voice trembled from behind me. "No. No way." Brielle's face had gone pale, frozen mid-step. One heel missing, her clutch held like a shield. Melissa was the first to move. She stepped forward, breath caught in her throat, and whispered loud enough for the nearest group to hear, "Oh my God, Marissa." The crowd parted like water. And then Ellison said it again, louder this time. "Lieutenant General Hale." My title, spoken aloud for the first time in public. Like thunder, the ground beneath us trembled from the fading vibrations of the rotors. The spotlight was no longer on Brielle. It was on me. And there was nothing she could say to take it back. Colonel Ellison stepped forward and handed me a sealed black folder, thick, embossed with clearance markings that only a handful of people in the country could legally open. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough that only I could hear over the receding thunder of the helicopter. "Target movement confirmed 2 hours ago," he said. "Pentagon wants your eyes on intercept recommendations. Merlin's window is narrowing fast." I nodded once. "Any casualties yet?" I asked, still calm, still composed. "Not yet," he replied, "but the probability curve's rising. And if we delay, it won't hold." I finished for him. From behind us, I heard Brielle's voice break through the frozen air, sharp and stunned. "Wait, what did he just say?" People turned toward her. She was barefoot now, still trying to hold herself together as the entire event dissolved around her. "General?" she repeated, louder this time. "You're in the military?" I turned my head slowly, just enough for my voice to carry. "I thought you assumed I was peeling potatoes in Nebraska," I said evenly. The reaction from the crowd rippled like an aftershock. Murmurs, clicks, quick swipes of camera phones. Faces began to shift, some confused, some disbelieving, some finally connecting the dots. Caleb staggered forward, still holding his wine glass like a flotation device. Marissa, General. I didn't know. I thought you dropped out of law school." "West Point, I didn't even," His voice cracked, trailing off as realization hollowed out the last of his pride. Flashbulbs began popping now, not for Brielle, not for the award table, but for the woman standing at the center of the storm.
Me.
Melissa joined me at the edge of the crowd, her hands trembling slightly. Her eyes flicked over the uniformed officer, then to the folder, then back to me. "I don't understand," she whispered. "How did you hide all this?" "I wasn't hiding," I said quietly. "I was serving." From somewhere behind us, slow applause began. Uncertain, scattered, almost hesitant. A few people clapped, then more. The sound swelled into an awkward rhythm, not celebratory, but reverent. The weight of disbelief still hung in the air like smoke, but it was beginning to lift. I stepped toward the center of the lawn. My voice didn't need to rise above a whisper. People were listening now. Some people wear their uniforms loudly, I said, voice calm and firm. Others wear them quietly. That doesn't make us any less present. It just means we serve without needing to be seen. Colonel Ellison gave a small nod toward the helicopter. "Ma'am, ETA 1 minute." I turned to Melissa. Her eyes shimmered, not with confusion or pity now, but with awe. "You really are the fulcrum," she whispered. I gave a faint smile. Sometimes silence is a blade. Caleb took a few shaky steps forward. "Marissa, please. I was wrong. I didn't see you." "That's the problem," I said without turning. "You never tried to." Brielle stood off to the side, arms crossed tightly, her lips parted in stunned calculation. Her face wasn't twisted in embarrassment. It was thinking, strategizing. Even in her silence, she was plotting. As the crowd swelled, cameras lifted, and whispers turned into commentary, she pulled out her phone.
A swipe.
"Record. This is Hale," she said into the mic of her podcast app, Live from Whispering Pines, where some very unexpected truths are unfolding. Behind me, the rotors kicked up again. Colonel Ellison raised his hand, guiding me back toward the aircraft. I walked calmly, each step erasing 20 years of invisibility. As I climbed into the helicopter, the wind surged, blowing through designer dresses and tuxedo jackets. Glasses clinked to the ground. Flashbulbs flared. I glanced out the window one last time. Brielle was still recording. By the time my boots touched down in D.C., the internet had already caught fire, and her voice was echoing across it. Inside the Pentagon's secured skiff, the silence felt heavier, thicker than the noise outside. Fluorescent lights hummed quietly, and the glow of threat matrices blinked across screens. I shed the last remnants of perfume and small talk at the door. Here there was only intel, urgency, and data trails. Colonel Ellison didn't waste a second. He walked beside me down the corridor, briefing me as we passed rows of analysts and operatives. "Baltic server farm spiked 2 hours ago," he said, handing over a tablet. "Encryption signatures match Phoenix protocol. Disinformation clusters are already bleeding into public feeds. And General Monroe is waiting." I scanned the screen as we walked, threat paths, cross-vector attacks, rapidly evolving hashtags. One stood out. Hashtag Sister in Shadows. Hashtag General or PR. I stiffened. "Is this tied to Brielle?" Ellison gave a slight nod. "Her podcast. Dropped the night of the reunion. Called My Sister the Myth. Picked up by alt media within 6 hours. Now it's trending." I didn't need to listen. I knew the tone, the passive-aggressive phrasing. She had once joked about military narcissism over wine. Now she had weaponized it for clicks. We turned into the operations suite. General Monroe stood at the far end, tall, broad, a lifetime of ribbons across his chest. "Cole," he said flatly. "I've seen the chatter. Inside and out. You still good?" "I'm focused, sir," I replied. "Good. Because this breach isn't just technical. It's personal. They're using your identity as a chaos vector." He passed me a second file. The projection screen behind him lit up with red lines crisscrossing maps and timestamps. The podcast triggered a misinformation spike. "Your name's now tied to the Merlin grid collapse. Civilian networks think it's a cover story. We've got satirical talk shows saying you're deep state cosplay." My jaw tensed. Sir, I prefer not to engage with this nonsense. You don't have a choice, he said. The battlefield's changed. If they control your story, they control perception. And perception. General precedes truth. I nodded slowly. He looked at me, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. You know who you are. Don't let them define it for you. Back at my terminal, my secure inbox overflowed. Media requests. News anchors. Editorial panels. Satirists wanting me to read mean tweets in uniform. I ignored them. Then came the darker wave. Hate mail. DMs. Anonymous accusations. Claims that I was a fraud. An actress. A glorified prop. One video looped me stepping into the helicopter. The caption. Staged for optics. Where's the real general? I rubbed my temples. My face didn't flinch, but my chest did. A red alert flashed. Target. Lieutenant General Hale. Active disinformation threat level. 45. Origin. Civilian Echonet outlet. Citizen Circuit. Uploaded 3 hours after podcast drop. She hadn't just questioned me. She'd fed me to wolves. Then a new message. Personal line. Voice note from Melissa Drake. I hesitated. Then pressed play. Her voice came through fast, breathless. Marissa, you need to hear this. I just spoke to Caleb. He told me something about Brielle. Something she did years ago. Something she erased. I think it connects to all of this. You need to know. I froze. Because for the first time in years, I realized that the silence I had trusted, had hidden in, was now being used against me. The Pentagon's concrete walls offered no comfort that night. My office, tucked behind layers of biometric clearance, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a chamber of slow unraveling. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, steady and clinical, illuminating too many unanswered questions. Outside, the courtyard was still. But my mind was moving faster than any classified stream. Jason sat across from me. Yes, Caleb Morrison. He'd asked to meet in person, and I allowed it because of what Melissa had said in that voice note. He wasn't smug now. He looked like a man carrying something he'd buried for years, and the weight had finally caved in on him. His tie was loose. His hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. I should have told you sooner, he said, voice strained. I didn't think it mattered back then. But now, I watched him closely. Not judging, not forgiving, just analyzing, the way I'd been trained to. She came to me right after you enlisted, he continued. Brielle. She said you'd asked the school to remove your name from the alumni honors list, that you didn't want the attention. My brow creased. And you believed her? He looked down, ashamed. It was Brielle. She was always so sure. So polished. She forwarded an email to the board, said you wanted to avoid confusion since you'd left the Ivy League path. The narrative, I said flatly. He nodded. She made it sound like she was protecting your wishes. But she was rewriting mine, I said softly. And you let her. I didn't respond, he admitted. Didn't question it. I just let it happen. I stood and turned away, pressing my hand against the cool edge of the filing cabinet. Inside me, a scream formed, tight, hot, but I didn't let it out. That wasn't how I operated. She erased me, I said. Not just from lists. From our history. From the record of who I was, of what I did. Jason looked up, guilty and silent. A knock at the door. Melissa entered, holding a manila folder like it carried the weight of a verdict. I found it, she said, walking forward. The Medal of Honor file. From 2018. My breath caught. I had assumed the nomination was dropped due to red tape. I had never questioned it, just accepted the silence as part of the service. Melissa opened the folder and slid out a printed email. The paper was grainy, faded, but the message was clear. At the top, Brielle Hale. Federal DOJ email address. Subject, Medal of Honor submission, Lieutenant General M. Hale. Text, General Hale has expressed a strong desire for anonymity. Please do not pursue further recognition without direct consent. I stared at it. I never wrote that, I whispered. I know, Melissa said. But she was your emergency contact at the time. She had access. Jason sat back, visibly shaken. She told the committee, "You withdrew your consent," Melissa added, "and they dropped it without ever contacting you." I clenched my fists. The air felt thick with betrayal. Brielle hadn't just stolen credit. She'd prevented recognition from ever reaching me. She didn't just remove me from the present, I murmured. She erased me from legacy. Jason's voice cracked. "She's organizing the alumni board now. I got a call this morning. She's trying to block your current nomination. She's calling it a restoration effort. Says it's about preserving the alumni brand." I turned, my voice cold and quiet. She's not defending the brand. She's trying to keep control of the narrative. She's scared of what happens if the truth becomes louder than her version. Jason nodded, guilt thick in his features. "What do you want to do?" My answer came, without hesitation. "I want them to see what she tried to bury." The next day, the Jefferson High Auditorium smelled like lemon polish and aging carpet. Rows of folding chairs lined the center, maroon ribbons tied to each one. A large banner hung across the stage. "Legacy and Leadership, celebrating 20 years of excellence." I hadn't been invited, but I didn't need permission. This wasn't about seating charts or dinner speeches. This was about presence. Brielle stood on stage, flawless in a cream suit and pearl earrings. Her voice rang through the room, smooth, authoritative, practiced. "Success," she said, "is not about medals or mystique. It's about showing up, building something others can trust." Applause followed. Polite, respectful, misguided. "My sister once said she preferred to serve in silence," she continued. "But silence can be misleading. It lets myths grow in the cracks of truth." A murmur spread through the crowd. I saw heads turn. One reporter leaned to another and whispered, "Isn't her sister a general?" Brielle didn't flinch. "Real leadership," she said, "doesn't come from titles. It comes from showing up when it matters." At that moment, Melissa found me near the side aisle and pressed a folder into my hand. "It's all in there," she said. "DOD acknowledgement, nomination memos, and that photo." I nodded. Then I stepped into the aisle. Gasps followed. Chairs creaked. Faces turned. I walked toward the stage, each footstep deliberate. The alumni board chair noticed me. His eyes widened. "Lieutenant General Hale?" he asked. I nodded once. 3 minutes. Podium. He hesitated, then gave a slight nod. Brielle froze. I climbed the steps. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I faced the crowd. Hundreds of faces stared back. Alumni, students, faculty, press. Most of them unsure. Some stunned. I said nothing. Instead, I reached into the folder and pulled out a photograph. Me, in full dress uniform, standing beside General Clean at NATO command, receiving a classified commendation. A silver star gleamed on my shoulder. I held it up. Silence. No applause. No denial. Just stillness. Then I began. "My name is Marissa Hale. Jefferson High, class of 2003. First chair in orchestra. Founder of the International Relations Club. Voted most likely to become a professor." That one didn't age well. A small laugh rolled through the room. Nervous but real. I served because I believed in a country that didn't always believe in me. I didn't wear a badge for praise. I wore one for purpose. I held up the rest of the documents, redacted briefings, nomination letters, confirmations of clearance. These are pieces of a life lived beyond this room. Not glamorous. Not loud. But real. I glanced around the room, locking eyes with students in the front row, alumni in the back. This isn't about anyone else's story. It's about mine. About those who serve quietly, not for attention, but because not serving would mean someone else pays the price. Another hush. Then I added, "You can erase names from walls, but not from memory, and certainly not from history." With that, I stepped back. No dramatic music. No standing ovation. Just reverence. And then the alumni board chair returned to the mic. "It's time we corrected a mistake," he said. "General Hale, Your name belongs on our wall. And for the first time in 2 decades, it would be written in bronze. When the call came from the White House, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, but ready. The early morning air in Washington, D.C. was brisk and quiet as I walked through the marble halls of the Pentagon. Everything around me felt both familiar and distant. My boots echoed softly as I passed security checkpoints and saluted personnel. The corridors were the same, the rhythm unchanged, but something inside me had shifted. My name, once erased from invitations, was now being spoken in rooms where legacies were decided. Inside my office, Colonel Ellison arrived without knocking, a gesture I'd come to understand as respect between equals. He held a sealed blue and gold envelope, marked executive notification. He didn't speak right away. He simply placed the folder on my desk, stepped back, and waited. I opened it. The President of the United States takes great pride in awarding the Medal of Honor to Lieutenant General Marissa Hale for acts of valor above and beyond the call of duty. The words blurred slightly, not from emotion exactly, but from the weight of memory. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even smiling. I was absorbing. It's public, Ellison said. Ceremony next week. South Lawn. Full honors. I nodded. Who else knows? Media's embargoed, he replied. But Melissa's outside. She knows. I looked through the glass. There she was, pacing with her phone in one hand, earbuds in, scanning headlines. Her energy was unmistakable. I opened the door. She turned instantly. Have you seen it yet? She asked, almost breathless. It's everywhere. Front page, the Post. They're calling you the silent general. Listen to this quote. She carried the burden of command without ever asking for a podium. Now the country insists she stand on one. She paused, her voice softer. Marissa, it's happening. I gave a faint smile. It feels strange, like I've been underwater for years, and someone just turned on the sun. She stepped closer, her expression warm and proud. You earned this. Before I could respond, my secure line lit up. A young liaison officer from the White House appeared on screen, polished, respectful, but clearly nervous. General Hale, he said. The President would also like to speak with you personally regarding a defense advisory role, civilian-military integration oversight. You'll receive formal documentation by the end of the week. I gave a single, calm nod. Thank you. And congratulations, ma'am, he added. On behalf of the nation. When the call ended, I stepped outside, not into the press, not into the spotlight, just down a quiet side path where the shade still held a trace of night. I walked without destination, my boots crunching softly over gravel. No salutes, no photos, just air, just breath. Near a low bench, I sat down and looked up at the morning sky. So this is what being seen feels like. I murmured. Strange. Later that afternoon, I returned to my quarters to find an envelope waiting on the floor, slipped neatly under the door. No stamp, no seal, just my name, written in delicate, looping cursive I hadn't seen in years. It was from Brielle. Inside was a single note card, bordered in faint watercolors. In the center for words, "Can we talk?" Below that, a time, a date, and a location. Sunday, 10:30 a.m., Maison Brûlée Café, downtown Olympia. No spin. No flourish. Just an ask. Sunday morning, the cafe windows were fogged from the cold. The espresso machine hummed softly behind the counter. I arrived early, no uniform, no rank, just jeans, a coat, and a mind unsure of what to expect. Brielle arrived 10 minutes late. No makeup. Hair pulled back. Eyes rimmed with fatigue. Not the kind from late nights, but from emotional erosion. She looked like someone who'd finally stopped pretending. She sat down without asking. Didn't speak right away. Then, slowly, she slid a small velvet box across the table. I opened it. Inside was a photograph, faded, worn at the corners. 2 girls, maybe 8 and 11, standing in their backyard on Halloween, dressed in matching camouflage costumes. Both saluting. One grinning wide. The other, me, staring dead serious at the camera. "You kept this?" I asked softly. "I almost threw it out 6 times, she whispered. "But I couldn't." I looked at her. She wasn't performing now. She wasn't building a brand. She was just Brielle. "I spent 20 years trying to outrun your shadow," she said, voice quiet. "Turns out, I built that shadow myself." She stared down at her coffee cup, fingers trembling. "I thought if I was louder, more visible, I could catch up. But no matter what I did, you were always there, quiet, constant. And I hated how much I resented it. I hated how much I admired it." She blinked back something, maybe regret. "I didn't want you to disappear," she said. "I just didn't know how to exist next to you." For the first time in 2 decades, I saw the sister I'd grown up with. Not the podium star. Not the media strategist. Just Brielle, the girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and whisper, "Don't leave first." I reached across the table and gently placed my hand over hers. Her breath caught. "Then maybe now," I said quietly, "we stop running." It was never about the medals. It never needed to be. But standing on that stage, I had finally allowed myself to feel proud, not because of what I had won, but because of what I had carried in silence. Now, I wasn't alone in it anymore. The morning of the Medal of Honor ceremony felt unreal, like a memory I hadn't lived yet. The air on the South Lawn was crisp and ceremonial, the kind of stillness that only comes before something historic. Rows of white chairs lined the perfectly trimmed grass, each one placed with military precision. Flags flanked the stage, fluttering in the breeze. String musicians played softly near the hedges, their notes barely audible over the murmurs of arriving guests. I stood backstage, my uniform pressed to perfection. Service blues. Every ribbon aligned. Every medal earned, though not all of them visible. My spine was straight, my gloves stark white. It felt less like a costume and more like a second skin, finally accepted, finally unhidden. In the 3rd row, I spotted Brielle. She wore a navy blazer and sat next to Melissa, who held a worn copy of the manuscript we'd been working on together. Leading in silence. I hadn't decided whether I'd let them publish it. But Melissa said the world needed it. That I owed the truth, not the myth, but the record. Brielle didn't wave. She didn't smile for the cameras. She just sat quietly, her eyes never leaving the stage. When the president stepped to the podium, the hush fell like a blanket across the lawn. "Today," he began, "we honor not just a soldier, but a sentinel. A woman who walked through 20 years of conflict, diplomacy, and secrecy, not seeking recognition, but shielding others from its cost." He looked out over the crowd. Lieutenant General Marissa Hale chose silence. "But today we speak her name." Applause rose, calm, respectful, firm. The kind of applause that didn't crave spectacle. The kind that meant something. He turned, lifted the Medal of Honor from its velvet box, and placed the ribbon around my neck with deliberate care. The star glinted in the sunlight, not loudly, but steadily. For the first time in years, I allowed my chest to rise without bracing for resistance. Somewhere near the back, a young child clapped louder than everyone else. A veteran next to her removed his cap and held it to his chest. When I turned to descend the stairs, a cadet stood waiting at the bottom. She couldn't have been more than 19. Her chin was lifted, her uniform perfect, her salute crisp. "Thank you, ma'am," she said. I returned the gesture with quiet pride. "Keep going," I whispered, "even when no one's watching." I stepped back to the podium for a few words, not rehearsed, not written by anyone else. "I used to believe silence was strength," I said, "that to serve meant to disappear. But I've learned something else." I paused, scanning the faces, military brass, civilians, teachers, cadets, my sister. We don't serve for applause. But sometimes, it's good to know we were never truly invisible. The applause came again, softer now. More personal. After the ceremony, as the crowds dispersed and photo lines formed, a presidential aide approached with a formal offer: a desk in the West Wing, advisory clearance, civilian military liaison. I declined. Instead, I chose a classroom at Fort Liberty. The lecture hall wasn't glamorous. beige walls, aging projectors, scuffed floors. But to me, it was sacred ground. 30 cadets sat at attention, notebooks open, questions forming behind their eyes. The nameplate at the podium read, Lieutenant General Marissa Hale, Ret. Visiting Scholar. Ethical Leadership in Asymmetric Environments. One cadet, a sharp-eyed girl with freckles and confidence beyond her years, raised her hand. "Ma'am," she asked, "what do you do when the system works against you?" I looked at her for a long second.
"Lead anyway," I said.
"And document everything." The class laughed. But they understood. These young women weren't here to pose in uniforms. They were preparing for pressure, ambiguity, and battles no one would ever thank them for winning. They reminded me of myself, the version I had once been, the version no one clapped for, until now. Midway through the day, there was a knock at the back of the hall.
"Brielle."
Again, no makeup, simple jeans, a navy blazer, and a camera bag slung across her shoulder. She waved sheepishly. "I'm working on a documentary series," she said quietly. "Women in Command." Thought I'd start where I should have started years ago. I raised an eyebrow. That's a long way from podcast slander. She smirked faintly. "People change." Melissa appeared behind her, grinning and holding up a mock-up of our book's cover. "They want co-authors," she said. "You in?" I looked between them, my sister and my old friend. Both of them shaped now by truths that no longer had to be hidden. I nodded. "Let's write it right." Back in the classroom, the cadets had made something for me. A large poster board drawn in colored markers. Figures in uniform. A central portrait, half shaded, half lit. At the top, written in cursive, "Our General." I swallowed hard. "Thank you," I said, voice thick. Then I cleared my throat and turned back to the class. "Command isn't about volume," I said. "It's about showing up, especially when it's hardest to." They scribbled notes, sat a little straighter. At the end of the day, I returned to my desk. My secure tablet blinked red. I opened it. Subject: Ghost Viper, urgent. Status: high-level threat. Request: Cyber Task Force Advisory.
Clearance: Code Black.
I stared at the screen, calm but focused. Heart steady. Mind already calculating. I hadn't disappeared. I had simply been doing my job where they couldn't see me. The hallway outside Jefferson High's Hall of Legacy smelled faintly of varnished wood and freshly printed programs. Polished floors reflected soft golden light from antique sconces mounted along the walls. Maroon banners hung with quiet pride, each one embroidered with past themes of excellence, ambition, and honor. I stood at the far end of the corridor, dressed in full uniform. Not for show, but for clarity.
The honor wasn't just about me.
It was about reclaiming what had been erased. The Hall of Legacy wasn't grand, just a modest, reverent space with bronze nameplates, framed portraits, and quotes from alumni who had shaped the school's story. For years, my name had been missing. Not by oversight, but by intent. Today, that silence would end. A small ceremony had been arranged, not a major event, just a quiet acknowledgement. Students stood in press blazers. A few teachers I recognized stood near the edges. Members of the alumni board clustered in the back, holding printed programs. At the podium stood Brielle, a single sheet of paper shaking slightly in her hands. Her voice, when she began, was clear, but quieter than usual. "She served without needing to be seen," Brielle read. "But today, we choose to see her. Not for the rank, not for the medals, but because of what she stood for when no one was watching." She paused. "She's my sister. And more importantly, she's someone I've come to learn from." Brielle stepped down. She didn't look at me for applause. She just joined the crowd. Melissa stood nearby in a navy blue dress and simple flats, clutching the same marked-up copy of our manuscript. She'd flown in late the night before, promising not to make a big deal of it. She lied. Inside the event program, I spotted a quote from our draft, bold, centered. "Leadership doesn't echo in applause. It echoes in choices." There was a quiet murmur as a custodian gently removed the black cover from a new bronze plaque on the wall. My name was etched there now. Marissa Hale, class of 2003. Beneath it, a simple phrase. Integrity in silence. No rank. No titles.
Just that.
A faculty member gave a short speech about conviction, about how legacy isn't shaped by fame, but by impact. I barely heard it. My eyes had drifted to the far corner, where 5 young cadets stood at attention, uniforms pressed, arms by their sides, expressions proud. Melissa stepped beside me as the camera shutters started clicking. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. I took a breath. Not a deep one, just enough. "It's not about being remembered," I said. "It's about making sure the right things are." She smiled and rested her hand on my shoulder. From behind us, a voice whispered, "She's the reason I applied." I turned slightly. One of the cadets, barely 19, was nudging her classmate. Her eyes were wide, reverent. I said nothing. I didn't need to. I stepped back from the plaque. Let them take the photos. Let them speak the words I had once been denied. Then I walked away. My footsteps echoed softly across the polished floor. No applause. No ceremony music. Just silence. But this time, it was the kind that meant presence, not absence. And after years of being erased, dismissed, and buried beneath someone else's version of the story, my name had finally been carved not only into bronze, but into truth. Because the girl they once mocked for fading into the background had become the woman whose quiet courage moved history. She never needed their approval.
She only needed them to see.
And now they did.